Yes, welcome back to the podcast. If this is your first time here, I'm Dr. Teranda Knight. I am the host, the CEO, a founder, consultant, and coach for Virtually Renowned Consulting Access LLC. And I am the host today for the Plan of Leadership and Behavioral Health Talks with Dr. TK. Today, I want to talk about when systems strain leaders, break first, what the last month taught us about power, care, and accountability. So, in this space, it exists for leaders, practitioners, and advocates who are trying to do ethical work inside the system that often reward the opposite. So, this information that I'm sharing is information that isn't for you to diagnose or try to treat or provide some level of system of care on your own. It is sheer information to spark some insight for you to maybe drive you towards the change that's needed on your campuses. Over the last 4 weeks, my newsletter, which is the unlicensed expert on LinkedIn, it focuses on something very specific, not trends, not tactics, not platitudes, but pressure points. That place where people, policies, and power collide. And today, I want to take you beneath the headlines and beneath the LinkedIn subbites to talk about what's actually helping or happening to leaders, institutions, and communities right now, and why so many are burned out, being silenced, or being blamed for failures they did not architect. This isn't about personal weakness. It's about systemic strain. And if you're been feeling it, you're not imagining it. So let's begin. Over the last month, we've watched several things happen simultaneously. In higher education, institutions are facing renewed scrutiny around outcomes, data governance, and return on investment narratives, while being asked to do more with less, fewer staff, smaller budgets, more compliance, more reporting. And in behavioral health, demand has not slowed, but the administrative and documentation burden has increased. And ethical providers are being pressured to justify care through structures that were designed for integrated support. And online, particularly across social platforms, we are watching new iterations of influencer culture take hold. One where credibility is manufactured, and stress is monetized, and accountability is optional. These aren't isolated trends. They are connected because when systems become strained, they don't fail evenly. They push pressure downward onto students, clients, mid-level leaders, educators, clinicians, and advocates, while decision-making becomes further isolated and distracted. And that's where leadership breaks are happening, not at the top, but in the middle. So let's take a look at when attendance data and performance become more proxies. One of the recurring themes in my recent newsletter has been how institutions conflate presence with performance. Attendance, productivity dashboards, engagement metrics, documentation completeness, none of these are inherently unethical. But here's the problem. When metrics become moral judgments, we lose the human context entirely. We see this on campuses. A student disengages not because they don't care, but because they're overwhelmed, food insecure, caregiving, or navigating untreated behavioral health needs. We see it in the care systems. A clinician documented insufficient justification, not because the care wasn't necessary, but because the framework can't capture relational work, trust building, or prevention. And we see it in leadership. When someone raises concern, not as defiance, but as foresight, they're labeled resistant, difficult, or not aligned with the culture. Metrics don't measure ethics. They measure compliance. And when institutions confuse the two, leadership becomes performative, not principled. So next up, let's take a look at FERPA HIPAA and the illusion of safety. Another thread running through the last few weeks in the false sense of protection created by policy language. FERPA, HIPAA, data privacy standards. On paper, they look protective. In practice, they often become shields not for individuals, but for institutions. What many leaders are realizing right now is this. You can be technically compliant and still be deeply unethical. Privacy laws are not designed for integrated systems, real-time data sharing, predictive analytics, or AI-supported case management. So what happens? Leaders become afraid to act. Support teams hesitate to collaborate. Students and clients fall through gaps created by interpretive fear, not legal reality. When policy is treated as a wall instead of a boundary with gates, care fragments, and the emotional burden of the fragmentation lands on frontline leaders, the ones who must choose between doing what is right and doing what is safe. This is not a leadership failure. This is a governance failure. So next up, digital culture influence and the normalization of harm. Now let's talk about the online space because pretending is separate is no longer honest. Influencer culture in 2026 has matured in one crucial way. It no longer requires credibility, only coherence. If a narrative sounds confident enough, feels emotional enough, repeats often enough, it's treated as truth. That's how trauma becomes branding, conflict becomes currency, and call-outs replace accountability. But here's what doesn't get talked about. This culture trains people to replicate harm in order to be seen. It becomes, I survived this, so you should too. I suffered, so your suffering proves legitimacy. I was silenced, so I will silence others. This is what I refer to as the feeding the beast. And leadership that emerges from this ecosystem often confuses visibility with integrity. Real leadership doesn't escalate harm to validate itself. It interrupts harm even when no one applauds. So next up, the plan of leadership, what survives strain. In my work and in my writing, I return again and again to a simple truth. Healthy leadership grows like a plant. It requires strong roots, which is ethics, identity, boundaries. It requires nourishment, which is support, reflection, and learning. And it requires pruning, letting go of roles, expectations, and systems that no longer serve life. When leaders are forced to produce fruit without root care, collapse is inevitable. What we are seeing right now as institutions, online and in communities, is root depletion. No time to reflect, no space to dissent safely, no margin for humanity. And so I'll say this plainly. If your leadership role requires you to numb, perform, comply, and endure without support, that role isn't sustainable. Not for you, not for those you serve. And needing to leave, pause, recalibrate, or redesign does not mean you fail. Sometimes it means You refuse to poison the soil. So as I close today, I want to ground us here. The last 4 weeks of news, of policy shifts, of online discourse have made one thing clear. Systems do not change because they're challenged. They change when people withdraw their energy from sustaining harm. Leadership is not about enduring toxicity elegantly. It's about discerning when. Silence protects harm, compliance enables damage, and resilience becomes code for neglect. So if you're listening, and it feels like you're tired, you feel like you need some clarity, you may be right. If you've been questioning your role, but not your values, this distinction matters. And if you're choosing not to feed the beast anymore, you're not alone. Join me. I'm Dr. Teranda Knight. Visit me online, virtually renowned Consulting Access LLC, today. Get on my calendar, view my website for more information, more support. I'm looking to hear from you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for thinking deeply. And thank you for choosing ethical growth over performative power. Until next time, remember, never feed the beast, never fed the beast. Work hard, stay peaceful, and let's create roots of resilience. Take care of your roots and get the support in doing so.